We are more than halfway through. Since I last spoke to some of you in class or you heard a lecture recording, I have finally finished and released feedback on the assignments. I've provided you with some overview feedback and hopefully enough direct feedback to give you some sense of where you are at. I've had already, as is always the case, a number of people will be in touch who want to spend some time with me, and I will publish, in fact I'll put it in the chat now, a link to just making an appointment. I just want to be clear, I don't actually work on campus. I don't actually work for RMIT. I just blow in and do stuff occasionally. So I don't have an office or a desk or any particular desire to go in there if I don't need to. So contacting me is usually this way. You can set up a Zoom meeting, or you can, try and do two things at once. Or if you want to do it by telephone, that's fine. You're very welcome to come and sit in my kitchen. You know, I think that's probably going a little too far for all of us. I can't remember where the chat is. Here it is. I will just put the link in. Hopefully it will, yep, there. So if you want to book in specific time. So today I thought I would spend a little bit of time just giving some overview feedback. Because we've got two topics to cover in class anyway, if you want me to go through that. I do not want to talk specifically about the answer to the problem because unfortunately we've got a couple of people for various reasons who are yet to submit, and I don't think it's fair to share stuff about the answer to the problem. But to go through in sort of a general detail, I'm more than happy to. So if you want to talk about the answer, you do need to make time with me separately. Otherwise, I'm here to take your questions and to work through. We went through at lightning speed the content for the last two topics last week. There wasn't anything in particular I wanted to point out. I did notice that only a very small number of you have done the quizzes that I put together for those topics. So one of the things about doing the quizzes is it does give me a sense of where there is a consistent, people are consistently getting things wrong. And I don't have enough data to get a sense of that from the quizzes that I've done. So I rely on you for your questions. All right, so what do you want to do? Do you want to do some feedback on the assignment, or do you have questions for me?
Kat, hi, it's Maria.
Hi, Maria.
Hello. I've just got a quick question in relation to the quizzes. For a number of reasons, as you know, I haven't been able to do some of them. Is it still possible to do some of the previous ones?
So I think there's two things we're talking about here. One is every week, in Canvas, there will be at least one quiz, which sometimes overlaps substantially with the things that we do in class, is often completely separate. So when they overlap substantially with the stuff that we do in class, there's usually a second quiz, which is really just a revision quiz. They're just sitting there in Canvas for you to do at whatever time. They don't get marked. They don't go towards your mark. They're just there for you to assess how you're going. They're actually really time consuming to do. And so I'm building them. And so the quizzes for this week, I actually only built on Monday just before the lecture. Anyway, so that might be one of the reasons why less people have done them. I think, Maria, what you might be talking about too is the discussion board problems. And they work two ways. You are an online student from memory, and that means 5% of your mark is determined by those discussion board problems. And it's actually, there are 10 of them, and your 5 best marks go towards that. They have a due date of every Sunday night. If you do them late and you don't get an extension from me, which I can't believe I'm going to say this on a recording, but an extension on those things is really easy to get from me. I can give you 7 days because they're such a small task and I understand how busy you are. You just have to ask me beforehand if you need extra time. But if you do them 10 days late, then you'll get a discount. But you've got 10 of them over the semester, and they go in total to 5% of your mark based on your 5 best.
Lovely, thank you.
Most people who do them, quite frankly, most people who do them will get a minimum of 3, and the average is about 4 out of 5 if you do 5 or more of them. It's just like, that's how it works out. And part of the reason for trying to get you to do that is it encourages you guys in the online world to talk to each other. And usually about half of you do them. This time, very few of you online people are doing them. Also for the online ones, they will stay open for you to do. You can't see what anybody else has done unless you do them, but they will stay open for you to do because you get a mark on them. Face-to-face, you guys, they're there. They're exactly the same things there for you. I will mark them exactly the same way, and you will get a number and some feedback if you do them. But they don't go towards your mark. And the reason for that is pure selfishness on my part. I do not have the time and they do not pay me to do it. And so I do the ones, I do it for the people who want to do it because I like you and I'm a sucker for doing shit like that. But yeah, it's just not there. And what's funny about it is pretty much everybody UA will put in their feedback when you do these surveys that it's not fair that you have more work to do than the face-to-faces. Where I think I'm giving you a little bit of love that they don't get. It's, we need to communicate more.
That's fine, thank you.
Sorry, you didn't realise that was going to get me out on a rant, did you? But interestingly enough, it's really funny. Every class has a personality, and the face-to-face personality on this class is, I'm going to call you swotty nerds. Lots of people comparatively are doing it, which is great. I'm really happy. You get to talk to each other. People do the work. And so you're seeing each other and what you do for those who do it. Oh, by the way, the face-to-face ones, clearly you don't get a penalty if you submit them late. But what happens is the minute I start marking them, I just turn them off. So you can't submit by that stage because I can't keep going back to them and marking them. It's just, if I told you the economics of it, you would say, you're a crazy lady. Why do you do this at all? You might just think I'm a crazy lady anyway. Maybe you don't think I'm a lady. Who knows? So, yeah. Basically, you just get in there and do it. And so usually I mark them on Monday mornings. That's when it's in my diary to mark it. This week I didn't mark them until Thursday or Friday, the ones that were outstanding. So it just depends on what the load is. But yeah, back to my point, do the quizzes, dudes. They are a really, yes, many of them are multiple choice. I've tried to be a bit creative with them. I have fill in the gap problems. I've just got stuff that can automatically mark. So you will basically get a score and you get feedback as you go on, whether it was right or wrong and how they went. I made them. I feel it's sort of like coming to your house with cake and you say, no, I'm on a diet. I feel a little miffed when you don't have a go at them. But, I try not to take it personally. I just think, oh, it's got a long use-by date. Some other class will use them. Yeah, so do have a go. Questions, concerns? How do we go with certainty? Did you feel rushed?
Yes.
I'm not surprised. So we do a lot with bringing certainty and formalities into the same week. And next week we'll feel a bit rushed too. I want to remind you that in many ways we've talked about certainty a lot over the course of the course of the subject. That makes more sense. Because really it's completing that circle, that in order to have an enforceable agreement, we need agreement, which is made up of an offer that can be accepted without variation on its terms. That can be accepted without variation requires it to be certain what the terms of the contract are. So if you think about an offer as a kind of capsule, and that's why I use that expression, the DNA of the deal. By the way, a few people quoted that in their assignments. I thought that was kind of cool. I feel like I'm going to just like get this whole generation of lawyers using CAF language. I'm just going to wait for one of you to be a Supreme Court judge, so I feel really, and then you'll get the credit. But anyway, the DNA of the deal, that sort of idea that everything that you need to make a contract is encapsulated in an offer, and all you need is for that offer to be accepted before it's withdrawn or terminated in some way for us to create an agreement at that moment. And I know it's a bit of a gross analogy, but the conception analogy works for me. You've got all of the DNA that you need effectively, and all you have to do is match it. If you try and change it, it's not matched. You just literally have to match it. And so that means consideration and certainty. So certainty as to the terms, to the important elements at the very least, need to be included in that offer. And necessarily intention needs to be in that offer as well. That idea, and there's a quote that I gave you right at the very beginning when we were looking at intention, which is very American in its language, but I think makes sense of what an offer is. That an offer is something that a person knows that just by assenting to it, was the language used, just by assenting to it, that the other party intends to be bound to do the things they've offered and requires you to be bound by the things that to do the things that they've asked for in exchange. Now, of course, we know that in real life, it's rarely as simple as offer, then matching it with acceptance. What we actually have is a meeting of the minds, a consensus of some sort. But that consensus needs to encapsulate certainty, intention, consideration. And it doesn't really matter what order we talk about them in. So I know you feel rushed, but at the same time, you're on a good platform for it. So the trick with certainty is, again, remembering that it is a heading that really addresses three things. Are all of the terms sufficiently certain? Do we know what the terms are? In fact, do we know what was promised and what the exchange of promises look like? Is it complete? Are all the important things dealt with? And often that will go to consideration. Have both parties made a promise? And then we've got this weird kind of one, the double negative, it's not illusory, which goes hand in hand when you think about it with consideration. If I make you a promise, but it's so discretionary that it's not really a promise, then there's no consideration. And the document or the set exchange of promises isn't certain.
Sorry, Kath, can you just say that again?
Which bit? I just went on for a little rant.
About certainty and the illusory. Illusory, sorry.
Illusory. No, it is.
Illusory.
There is a magic to it, but not the kind of magic that involves David Blaine or anything like that. So basically, a promise that is illusory fails for lack of certainty, but when you think about it, it is also a failure to have consideration. So if I make you a promise and it is so couched in discretion, so I promise to give you this paintbrush. I have weird things on my desk. I promise to give you this paintbrush if I feel like it sometime between now and when a space station lands on Earth. Like, it's so random, and like, it doesn't actually, I've not really made a promise. We don't know whether I'm going to feel like it or not. I've couched it in that subjective language. So my promise is not really a promise. So there's no consideration for whatever it is that you promised me in exchange. So question then becomes, well, why don't we just talk about that in consideration? Why are we putting it in with certainty? Any of you got any feeling on that? Why would we do that other than just to confuse you, which, you know, may well be a motivator?
Is it simply because, Kath, when we're talking about certainty, it really talks about the fact that the terms and conditions can be unique to each party that's actually entering into that particular agreement. So, for example, in a rental agreement, the most important thing, or one of the most essential terms you'd probably say, is, say, the rental price.
The
and
price.
then you have to pay. Yes, but it's not always the case in other agreements. So perhaps in that case?
Yeah, look, I think that is part of it. I think where you're going to start off with is we need consideration in order to have a contract. But there's no matching promise for promise. If I make you, I might say I'm renting you my house. I'm going to promise that it will be, you'll have unrestricted access to it, that I will not go and change the locks while you're there. I might also agree I'm going to send a gardener every month. I'm going to clean the swimming pool. You'll then make promises to me about paying rent, an amount and at a time. You'll make promises to me about keeping, you know, my property in good repair. But we don't necessarily match, you know, one promise for one promise for one promise for one promise. We just need, in any agreement, if I make you promises, there needs to be an exchange, effectively, of a promise or promises. So they don't have to match one for one once we bundle them in an agreement. So if let's say we'll go back to the rental agreement, and we agree that the term will be 5 years or such other term as I determine in my discretion. I'm the landlord. So in effect, that means perhaps, depending on how it's written, that you have to continue to rent for me, and for as long as I decide that you should continue to rent from me. Or we might have signed the agreement, you pop in tomorrow and I say, oh no, I've decided that the term should be shorter. You're out today. It's not, I haven't really promised you free and unrestricted access for the term, but the agreement itself probably won't fall over for a lack of consideration because we have exchanged promises. There just hasn't been sufficient certainty in relation to a essential term. How long you get the property for would mostly be determined to be an essential term. And that lack of certainty arises because the promise I made was so illusory, not be a promise at all. I need better examples of illusory promises. Again, this is not something that comes up, but it is important to identify that you need to have all of the elements, including certainty, and certainty itself is made up of those three factors. But it's closely aligned with consideration. And if you were doing a problem that included somebody making a promise that was discretionary in some way, that they didn't have to keep if they didn't want to, then you might look at consideration, you might look at certainty, you would be clever to look at both. Anything else on certainty? I'm just looking at my notes as to where issues are. The thing we didn't spend a lot of time talking about, well, we didn't talk about it specifically in class. We talked about it sort of ad hoc as we went, was what the consequences are if a document lacks, sorry, I always say document, I'm such a transactions lawyer, if a contract lacks certainty. And because it's a formation element, it's worth turning your mind to that, because a court, the maxim, and we talked about the maxim in Latin, it's got regis in it, can't remember the exact term at the moment, but effectively what it means is that a court will prefer to find something that has effect than to toss out a contract altogether. So even though certainty is a formation element, particularly if there has been part performance, or particularly if the parties have conducted themselves as if there is a contract, even though there is some kind of uncertainty, then rather than find no contract at all, if they can, they will seek to sever out the offending terms, whether that's from a written agreement or from an understanding, to see if the contract can continue without those terms. And if they can, then they will let a contract survive. So if the term that is missing or incomplete or illusory is so fundamental to what the agreement is, then they will they won't be able to find a contract at all. So the Luna Park case is a really good example of that. So the Luna Park one was where Sydney Luna Park wanted to put advertising, or did put advertising on trams. The parties agreed, that the tramways agreed that it would have trams running around Sydney that had these advertisements on them for a minimum of 8 hours a day. They didn't do that. So the trams with the ads on them weren't out for a minimum of 8 hours every day, but they were out for an average of 8 hours. So tramways argued a number of things, but one of those things was there's no real difference between a minimum of 8 hours a day and an average of 8 hours a day. But Luna Park said, no, that's not the case. It was an essential term, and in the particular document, it was expressed as an essential term, that it was a minimum, and that gave them the right to terminate the contract. So there was that question about the interpretation, the construction of the contract. The next part of the question was, well, could the contract continue without that term? And ultimately the court said, well, no, it couldn't, because it was a fundamental term. It was an essential term to the parties, so that there was evidence that Luna Park would not have entered into that agreement unless they were getting that minimum of 8 hours a day. But then we've got other cases. I'm just trying, so I'm going to look on my list here to remind myself of one. Go to concur. Ah, yes, I know. Hunter Valley Freezing and Chilling Company. That is not the correct name of the case. But it's basically a council, and they're called the Freezing and Chilling Company. Basically the term was vague and difficult to read, but there was a term that effectively allowed the local council or the electricity supplier to increase the fee if their costs changed. And the customer said, no, it's too vague and uncertain. You shouldn't be able to enforce this term. Now, ultimately, the court said, well, actually, there is a sensible reading of it here. We can read it on the basis that changing the terms, changing the costs means going up. So if your costs go up, and they're costs that aren't otherwise dealt with somewhere else in the agreement, then you can put your fees up. And that's a sensible reading. It might not be clear outside of the context, but it's a sensible reading nonetheless. And we have a contract here that the parties have been dealing with. So again, they're looking to find a contract, particularly when there has been part performance. The other thing they can do is pull the contract, the term out altogether. So in Puri and Saunders, no, not Puri and Saunders. Goodness me, I really am getting old. Case names are just not coming to me. The one in South Australia about the bakery, where the bakers, or maybe that is Puri and Saunders. Anyway, somebody wanted to fit out some premises to use them as a bakery. No, sorry. I've confused myself by having Godeku and Kerwin in front of me, and I know that that's the wrong case. Just trying to think of it. So forget the bakery. Stop. I'm going to stop getting... It's very weird looking at you people strangely and thinking, oh, I have to know everything right now. And then I get flustered and it just gets terrible. So I'm just going to be vulnerable for a minute. Just let it go and start again. So an example of the court excising a term out was the case that related to the purchase of the property, which is Godeku and Kerwin, as I've got it on the list in front of me, where the sale was subject to finance. And the vendor sold the property early and said, actually, that term is illusory and uncertain because the vendor may not have got suitable financing, like they were unreasonable terms, it's too vague, subject to who. And the court said, oh, don't be stupid. Clearly, that term is for the benefit of the purchaser. It is up to the purchaser to determine whether or not they're acceptable finance terms or not. And it's also the purchaser could waive that term if they wanted to. That term could be excised out of the contract and it could still go ahead. One of the cases we didn't talk about in class was biotech is what I'm thinking of. Biotech and PACE. It was called Biotechnology and Australia and PACE. So that's actually quite an interesting one for those of you who are interested in the M&A space. Dr. Pace was a research scientist and he was lured to come and work for biotech on the basis of a number of different promises, which included that he would be able to participate in a share option scheme, very Silicon Valley. And they said, but at the time that he was lured to come and work for the company, they were very clear that they didn't have a scheme in place yet and that they needed to work on it. And there were a number of different factors. Then he worked there for a couple of years. They didn't do anything about the share option schemes. It was falling out and he left. And then he sued them for his share of these share options. And the court basically said, unfortunately, there is a tension here between the desire to uphold a contract or to enforce a contract on the one hand, but the need for certainty and clarity on the other. And that in this particular case, there were just too many uncertain elements. Generally, the terms of a contract must be those that reflect the will of the parties objectively determined, said well, he wasn't Justice Kirby then, Kirby P. Judges can lack the expertise to resolve uncertain terms of a contract, even though it may seem fair for them to do so. The courts have a limited capacity to substitute their views for what is fair for the parties who have failed or neglected to do so. So in this case, there were just too many variables. What price would Dr. Pace have to pay for these options? What would the strike price for the options be? What percentage of the company would be made available to employees of the company? And then what percentage of that pool should have gone to Dr. Pace? These and many, many other factors hadn't been considered at this stage. And so we really were just completely lacking in certainty in relation to that. Again, I think that's pretty consistent with the other cases, so I don't give you any more magic about certainty. Should we move on to formalities? Any particular questions, concerns, frustrations there?
Can I just ask about the essential term in the Luna Park case?
Yeah. Sorry, can you say the something term in the Luna Park case?
In the Luna Park case, essential.
Mm-hmm.
Is it fair to say that when something is expressed as a minimum requirement, it has to be exactly the way that it's expressed? It has to happen.
If it's an essential term, and this was expressed to be essential term, and so there's my, look, I haven't read the contract, I've only read the case, and but it is quite common in contracts to say, or it used to be, that time is of the essence, which is effectively a shorthand way of saying that any reference, if something has to be done under this contract by or within a certain time, then that is essential to the contract, and the consequences of you breaching that would allow the other party to terminate. So expressing the term in the body of an agreement as being an essential term means that the parties have agreed that this term is essential and others aren't. And we'll talk about this a little bit more when we get to week 9, 10, 11. They all bundle together in my mind. But it's just important to note that if it's an essential term, then breach of an essential term allows the other party to terminate.
Yeah.
Breach of a warranty is just damages.
When you say expressing as an essential term in the body of a contract, do you mean explicitly?
Yes.
Okay.
So explicitly that one of the terms, whether it was verbal or in writing, now in Tramways it was a written document, that this is essential.
Okay.
So part of the trick, and we'll look at this in some detail so weeks 9, 10 and 11, in theory are kind of 3 different topics, in reality are one big topic. Oh, you've got a cat. Sorry, I'm very easily distracted, aren't I? And so what we're doing in those 3 subjects is working out what the terms are. So we're building this framework. So we've got this container that we know about now, which is essential terms. And so over that period, we'll work out, well, where do you find the terms and how do you classify them? So we'll look at express terms. So the stuff people write down and specifically say, but then we'll also look at signs and tickets and online terms and conditions and things like that. Implied terms, so places where the law or other sources provide a term. And then we'll look also at special kinds of terms, disclaimers and limitations. So yeah, so that explicit statement is necessary there.
Thank you.
Pleasure, treasure. So formalities, one of the things that came out, I've had a couple of questions about afterwards, was the difference between a guarantee and an indemnity. I'd like to make sure that you're comfortable with what that is. How are you feeling about that? Anybody want to have a go at explaining the difference between a guarantee and an indemnity? I do a lot of talking in this class too. You're a quiet class. I'm not afraid to be wrong. I'm modelling behaviour I want from you. Okay. Why don't I have a go again? So, by the way, I'm assuming silence means that you are interested in making sure you understand this. Go on, Stephen, you're busting to have a go. Go on.
I'll have a go. Guarantee is you will make up the whatever's the loss, and an indemnity is you will you're covering. It's much broader. I can't remember how broad it is. Cover. I don't know. Maybe I'm. Sorry, I'm having a seniors moment.
So, you and me both, my friend. I think, so the language around a guarantee is important. So traditionally the language, and so I've just found it, I'm just grabbing my notes to make sure I get it right, because it's mirrored in section 126 of the Instruments Act. So section 126 of the Instruments Act, and I'm talking about the Victorian legislation because we have a Victoria bias, sorry to all you OUA people who are somewhere else, but there are corresponding provisions in each of the other states. But section 126 of the Instruments Act is the successor to the Statute of Frauds legislation in Victoria. And it uses the language, a special promise to answer for the debt, default or miscarriage of another person. And again, it takes research to understand where that comes from, but that is the classic definition of a guarantee. And a guarantee is a promise to pay someone else's debt if that person defaults. And a consequence of it is if the debt is void, so if the contract that creates the obligation to pay, or the purported obligation to pay, is void, then a guarantee is pretty meaningless. If Sigrid promises to pay Clay $100 and I guarantee Sigrid's promise under the contract to pay Clay $100, and it turns out that the contract between Sigrid and Clay is void, there is no contract because it's failed for one of the elements, then Clay's can come and try and enforce the guarantee, but because my promise is to pay Sigrid's debt and there is no debt, she's not going to have any luck. An indemnity, on the other hand, is a principal obligation. So a guarantee is also described as a secondary obligation. The principal obligor in the scenario I just put forward would be Sigrid. And I had the secondary obligation. But if Sigrid promises to pay Clay $100 and I agree to indemnify Clay against any loss or damage suffered as a consequence in going into business with that woman, Sigrid, very scary thing, she needs an indemnity. Turns out that the contract between Sigrid and Clay is unenforceable, so Clay has no ability to sue Sigrid for the debt. They can still come back to me because I have a primary obligation to Clay. Okay, that's that's I know it sounds like we're going around in circles, but the primary obligation of the indemnity is to hold the indemnified person harmless from any debt or any damage. In the scenario that we just discussed, Clay would suffer the damage of not being paid the $100. And so the fact that Sigrid didn't owe it to her is meaningless. But if it was a guarantee, the primary obligation is Sigrid's, secondary obligation is mine. I just have to do what Sigrid would have been obliged to do if she doesn't do it. She's not obliged to do anything, so I don't have to do anything. Now, the bit of the question I can't answer myself, I'd be really interested if you have views, and there's plenty of writing on this, is that I don't understand why guarantee, which on that level is a lesser obligation, has to be in writing in order to be enforceable, but an indemnity does not. Now, New South Wales has dealt with this by just saying, well, neither of them have to be in writing. And part of the reasoning for that, I suspect, is that a person who, both a guarantee and an indemnity are quite serious promises. And if somebody, so in the example I was using before, if Clay's decision to advance money to Sigrid is based on the comfort that they get from understanding that I'm going to either guarantee or indemnify that obligation, then it's ultimately a fraud on them if it turns out they got a guarantee and it wasn't in writing, so they're not paid, where if they got an indemnity and it's not in writing, they would have been. And there's a potential for harming somebody, and I'm not suggesting, Clay, that you are not an informed person, but say we're talking 12 weeks ago when you may have been less informed than you are now, you might not have thought to get it in writing. But it also shows, and part of what I want you to think about with formalities too, and this has come up a number of times in different assignments and in the exam, is, well, even if there is no formalities requirement, what is the advantage of putting it in writing? Other than it keeps transactions lawyers in the position where we can do things like teach university because we like it.
Is it, Kath, is it just because I think I'm just looking at it from a practical sort of sense where normally when you guarantee something, it's usually on the person. So the burden is really on the person undertaking the debt on someone else. But usually when you indemnify someone, because it's such a bigger scale, you tend to pass on that sort of obligation or share it by passing it on to a third party, like an insurance company. So for example, if I'm actually doing a contract, we don't do guarantees, but normally we indemnify like the organization, and we use a third party, like an insurer, to actually cover everyone to a certain limit.
Sure, absolutely. And from a commercially actually you want an indemnity. Always.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's a higher level, but also there's a level of specificity to it. I can never say that word. And yes, you're right. I mean, ultimately, an indemnity is a form of insurance. And look, under the Insurance Contract Act, getting an insurance policy from a registered insurer, it needs to be in writing anyway. Okay, so that formality requirement comes up in a different way. But still, technically, the kind of simple scenario that I was talking about, that is still an enforceable indemnity, a promise to indemnify someone against the loss or damage that they suffer. So I find it kind of interesting. One of the places where guarantees will come up from time to time is when parents guarantee children's obligations under loan or rental agreements. People sending a kid off to school in another state at the tender age of 16 or 17, and they're entering into a share house arrangement or university colleges or whatever they're doing. It's not at all uncommon for there need to be a parental guarantee. But at another level, you think actually what the place actually wants is an indemnity. And again, if it's not a necessary, we'll talk about this with capacity next week, if the underlying obligation is not enforceable, then the parental guarantee is probably not enforceable either. Now, accommodation normally would be enforceable, to be fair, if it's a necessary. But, you know, if I was guaranteeing my 17-year-old's schoolies bond, that might be a different thing altogether. Though I think most 17-year-olds would tell you that schoolies is a necessary part, taking into account their station in life. But that's some of the mysteries for tomorrow night there. The other thing with formalities, and I didn't get any questions about this, I don't know whether it worries you or not, that idea of what is covered by a contract that deals with an interest in land. It's a very broad definition. So it includes buying and selling the land, it includes leasing it, granting an interest of any kind in it, including a mortgage, creating an option to purchase or to lease or to mortgage or to acquire something else, an agreement that will take place in the future, the creation of an easement, anything really that affects the land. So if it looks like land's involved, it needs to be in writing. And probably the third issue that comes up thinking about it is this idea of what writing is sufficient, and does it all need to be in one document? And the short answer to that is it doesn't, but we need to be able to identify the joinder. It's a funny word, joinder, of the documents. So the documents need to relate to each other in some way. So that might be an email chain, could be enough, or an email that refers to a letter of a certain date, which in turn refers back to a receipt, which in turn refers to something else. Those creates a chain of documents. I don't know, I find formalities kind of fairly straightforward, but that's easy for me to say, isn't it? I don't think there's anything particularly exciting in there. I would like you to think about why you would prefer a written agreement over a verbal agreement. And I think that is in large part related to certainty as well. But I think you will have insights of your own that you will bring to that.
So Kath, this is many, many years ago, you had a guarantee at the bank that you would sign.
Yep.
Same kind of similar piece of paper than a mortgage. Was that a guarantee or is it like an indemnity?
There is probably, so a bank guarantee is a slightly different thing. So when you've got that word bank guarantee, so it is a guarantee. So what is actually happening there is, say I'm going to rent you my property and I might ask you for a director's guarantee. So I'm renting it to your company. Your company is only worth $2. And I say, okay, Sigrid, I can see your lovely oak paneling there. You live in a lovely house. You've clearly got some assets. I'll get a guarantee from you. And you say, piss off. I don't want to give a personal guarantee. I created this company solely for the reason of minimizing my exposure. But what we will do is we'll procure a bank guarantee. So what that actually involves is the bank guarantees me that you will pay your rent. Mm-hmm. And usually what you will do, so that's a guarantee document, and then you will give, usually the easiest way to do it, in inverted commas, is you then put some money on deposit with the bank, and the bank keeps that money until they're released from the guarantee. So they're dealt with in that way. Otherwise, they might actually give the guarantee, but then they might actually use the security on your property that you might have mortgaged with them or something else, which kind of defeats the purpose of you limiting your liability when you think about it, but that's often the way it works as well. So again, it's a good point though, because we need to be really precise about this language. So the guarantee here is a verb and bank guarantee is a noun. So the bank is guaranteeing and there's a bank guarantee document, but you still have to provide some security for the bank for doing it as a commercial transaction. So again, one of the things I pointed out in the research seminar that I did is one of the tools that can be really useful to you is the dictionary or encyclopedia of words and phrases that have been judicially considered. So terms like time of the essence, bank guarantee, indemnity, even a term as simple as land or essential terms, looking those up in that kind of resource will give you access to quotations from judges using those terms, but also the cases that have considered those terms. And often it's sort of one step beyond your legal dictionary, which, by the way, legal dictionaries are gold for this kind of thing too. So even just looking up the term in the dictionary, I've actually never looked at the one that you guys get recommended to use at as your intro subject. I've never actually had a good look at it. I can show you mine. It's ridiculous. I'm going to... It's like really sad. One of my article clerks gave me this as a present when they got admitted, probably about 15 years ago now. He's a partner in a law firm now. I kind of keep it more for sentimental reasons now because, it's all online. You don't need the paper. But you can see that with so many terms, actually, no, it's not going, I'll have to put it up really quite close, but any term you've got a definition, but you've also then go into the case law behind it. And the online, well, clearly they're not particularly super useful in a open book exam, an online dictionary. But again, if the first time that you're looking up what a term means is in the exam, you've probably got bigger problems than carrying a big book like that in there, just saying. But there will be times where it does make sense to do that. So yeah, to look at the terms. So I would encourage that. So we're almost at an hour. You guys are tired now, aren't you? It's like, it's week 8. You didn't take a break even though I told you to, or you got sick or something like that.
I think we had our intro weekend this weekend.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
I didn't realise. I really need to put those in my diary. But then it's done.
We are done.
You are done. So, like, how cool is that? Like, just some assessment tasks and you're actually a whole subject down, really. I'll be expecting full attention now.
Yeah.
Or something like that. So do you want me to quickly do some overview on the assignment, or yeah, I'm seeing nodding her head. Let me bring up my little chart. I did think I made way, way, way better than usual infographic on this. Screen 1. Why is that looking different from my screen one? Oh, there it is. No? Sorry, just give me 2 seconds and I'll work out where I'm at. Oh, that's right, because I'm in the wrong thing. we go here, we do that. Okay, I don't know why that's saying that, but anyway, that's what's going to. Just got to download for a second. So in a nutshell, and I know some of you will be disappointed with the marks that you got, and I don't want to diminish that in any way. I know that just because I think the results overall are great doesn't mean that each of you will be personally overly satisfied with your results. But overall, they were really strong. This is probably the strongest group that I have ever seen. The other thing I was particularly pleased with, just because it shows consistency in my marking as much as anything else, is that the median mark and the average mark were almost identical. So the median, so that's if you line the numbers up from the lowest to the highest, it's the one right in the middle. That median mark was 69 and the average mark was 68.85 or something like that. So they're really close. So that means there's clearly a curve. We don't mark to a curve, but a curve indicates that there's consistency, and on this kind of number of performances or submissions, you would expect to see a curve normally. So just right here, that's across both classes. In your own class, you can go in and see some graphs that show across your class. So I put both OUA and face-to-face together here. Another thing that is spectacular from my point of view is we had 4 HDs. I've never had 4, well, that high proportion before. And it's quite usual that the largest single number of submission marks will be somewhere between 60 and 69 in the credit range, where the largest single package were distinctions this side. So I was really happy with how you went. Of course, it's difficult because most of you are used to being the smartest person in the room, and by definition, most of you are no longer the smartest person in the room when it comes to doing this stuff. Some of you are. And again, that's a very loose way of putting it, smartest person in the room, at risk of offending everybody. This just shows you're good at assignments at this stage and that you're getting it. And I don't want people who were down in this grayer area, the passes and the credits. And by the way, no fails. And this has never happened to me before. I mean, well, there are a few who haven't submitted, and they're necessarily fails, but I've never had no fails in a group before. So I'm pretty pleased with that personally. Wanted to, I didn't realize how badly that would come out in this presentation process. Let me just we'll go out of here and I'll just, sorry, zoom it down. I just want to get out, come on. So I just want to make it bigger, exit that. So this list here, which is refusing to, oh God, now it gets bigger. On my phone, this looks lovely. On my computer, clearly not. I think my son's playing some terrible game. What I tried to do here is identify the things that the really good papers had in common and some common mistakes. Now, there will be people who got HDs that did at least one of these things. And there will be people who didn't get HDs who did a lot of these things that were good. Okay, one of the things that necessarily happens is not all comments are equal. And so we weight things. So if I've picked up a missing apostrophe or a small issue with AGLC, if I can see something for any of you where I think I can help you improve it, I will try and point it out within the time and the capacity that I have. I will also try and point out things that you're doing well, because again, my experience is, particularly with law students who on the whole have been pretty good at school their entire lives, is often you don't know why you're good. You follow the process, you follow the rules, and you can see what that is. One of the problems with this assignment that I saw happen with many people was actually it was a deceptively simple assignment. And I think there were a few people who saw that it was pretty straightforward from the beginning and then got stuck into an overthinking loop. So even though they had quite competently, probably better than competently, solved the problem, they were then looking at this 600 words shy or something. And so then they were giving me lots of information about less relevant things. And what that does for your reader is that things get lost. So it's hard for us to see the emphasis, and it's hard for us to be sure that you've actually made a judicious choice when you're discussing every issue and sort of scattergunning across the whole process. There are a few people too who got a bit tricked by the examples that I had. So the examples that are there are actually second assignment examples. And the reason for that is there's only so much that you can cover off in your first assignment. So I don't want to give you first assignment examples because I don't want you to get sort of stuck in thinking about the answers that somebody else gave on the same subject matter on a different problem. And so I've given you a second example. So they're very strong ones. The second assignment asks you to write a letter as well. And it's a different assignment in some ways. So the memorandum to your boss, it's similar tone of writing, similar structure, those kind of things work really well. But you won't required to write a letter or a statement of claim or settlement deed or anything like that. So that came up a little bit. But probably the biggest thing is you do need the structure. The IRAC structure is great for sorting out what the answer to the problem is and how you're going to address it. But you've got to think about your reader. And if you slavishly stick to that structure for presenting your answer, it gets choppy. People are going backwards and forwards. It can be unclear as to why you're dealing with an issue if you haven't linked it into the facts, or you're listing out all of the facts without clearly linking them to an issue or to the way the law applies. And there's such subtle differences. When you start to get that right, you'll think, oh, this is so easy now, but it does take a little bit of time to flick into that way of presenting information. I think I just did this for the sole purpose of including my Donald Trump. Sorry, I'm going to stop that share for a second. No, it's coming back. My Donald Trump cartoon there. One of the key things that I would like to point out is primary sources matter. If you make a statement about what the law is, whether it's in an executive summary, your conclusion, or the body of your work, you need to support that statement about what the law is with a reference. And a reference that is a case beats a textbook or something else every time. And a reference that is a case that includes a pinpoint, so it shows me that you know which judge and which bit of the judgment is specifically relevant to the point that you're making, that trumps everything. Also, again, with the writing, headings can be really, really helpful, but a heading that is issues, law, apply the law is not particularly useful. But some of the ones that I saw that were really good used a Q&A approach. Why does it matter whether something was sent by email or text? What is the difference between the blah, blah, blah and the blah, blah, blah? So actually setting out things in a Q&A style more and more popular in the profession, but also it just makes your work so much more readable. They're probably the things that I wanted to highlight as much as anything to point out that I've gone to a reasonable amount of trouble to list all of these things. And often I find when people have a look at these generalized things, they get a sense of where their work fits. Now, I don't want to talk about anybody's specific assignment or the answer, but are there any general questions?
Not question, but comment. For my assignment, forget the assignment, the notes you gave, thank you. They were really pointed and really helpful. So I appreciate the comments. That was good. Thank you.
Now, we all do a lot of work to try and make the feedback matter. And
I got an assignment prior, and the comments are useless. But this one, it's actually,
well,
it's really pointed. So I appreciated that. Thanks.
Oh, that's good. Well, I think too, and that's why I say don't be shy about touching base, because how do I say, everything I know about teaching, I know from being a parent. It actually doesn't matter what I say, it matters what you hear. So if I'm not being clear, then I need to find a different way to say something. And particularly, and we all know this, when you are writing things, and I am much less emotionally connected to your assignments than you are. So I might be, because I think I'm hilarious, right? I'm, could be joking away. Some of you will have got assignments that have got hand scribble over them. They include smiley faces, or I think somebody got a nuclear bomb, stuff like that. It's just, I am actually trying to find ways to explain my reasoning and thinking and to point things out. Not every comment is worth the same amount of value. So let me give you an example. A comment I made many times was something along the lines of, if you know the other side's surname, call them Mr. Cooper rather than Sheldon. Because even though you've got a level of informality, when you're writing to your boss these days, you don't have to be quite as strict and formal. Suggesting a kind of familiarity, particularly with the other side on a matter, but even with your own client, if you don't personally know them, suggests perhaps a familiarity that is not appropriate. And so you have to just balance that. Now, I'm just giving you that as advice because I'm a practitioner, and that's something nobody ever said to me when I started practice. And it's probably was a bit more formal again than it is now. But again, it's good advice in any working situation to start off a little bit more formal than you need to, so somebody can say, oh, you can relax here. You know what they say, dress for the job you want rather than one you go to. Like your first day, you'll always be a little bit more formal until you work out what else is going on. So those little things, nobody lost marks if they got that comment, but a lot of people got that comment. So it's a qualitative assessment. And the other thing that I have the benefit of that you don't is I get to read them all. So I can assess what is more readable in a way that is much harder for you to do. But again, I put a link in there. If you want to have a time with me individually on any of them, I'm happy. But I do try and give you comments so that I don't need to do that. But at the same time, I'm very happy to do it. All right, we're running 10 minutes over. I don't know what I'm having for dinner tonight. I'm hoping there's wine involved. It's been a long day. Hopefully, Danny's like, yes, please. I'm with you, my friend. Okay, guys, I will see some of your lovely faces tomorrow in class. We're on the homeward stretch. And for online people, you will see the recordings within 48 hours. It'll be within 24 hours because I'm heading off to Bendigo to see the Valencia exhibition with my mother-in-law on Wednesday, and I don't think I can get away with doing that if I haven't sent you a video. All right. See you later, people.
Good night.
So thank you, Kath. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.